So there were lots of comments about the autofocus test with regards to people who are in interviews moving around, and I don't know what kind of interviews you do, but most of mine are not highly mobile people. But I did want to show some movement of a person in the frame a little bit. Maybe it's a person who's much more dynamic and they're moving back and forwards. And I'm sure the autofocus maybe is having to adjust a little bit, I don't know, but I wanted to give some examples of that in this video of a person who's moving around a lot and maybe even looking away from the camera and then maybe looking back. Maybe they're, leaning forward and back and things are changing. Again, we're still leaving back here the computer with some lights and stuff to maybe demonstrate some of that. The other question that comes up oftentimes has to do with the video recording choices that I made. I was recording things in 1080/60, so there were several people who said, well, the problem tends to show up more in 4K. So today I'm at 4K 24 frame rate so that we can kind of see how does the autofocus respond when someone's recording in 4K versus 1080, and does that make a difference in pulsing and or its abilities? Now certainly in this format that I have now, I can't do a full walking test in here to show that. But personally, in my experience, I've not really seen any difference in the way the autofocus performs, whether it's in 4K or 1080, 24 or 60. Doesn't seem to matter in this case, but your results may vary. One of the other questions or comments that came up is that, well, I think if it was at a longer focal length, that might change things. Well, today we're recording at about 60 millimeters. Again, I'm on the Lumix 24 to 105 kit lens that comes with the camera. So what you're seeing today is at about 60 millimeter focal length. I suppose you might go up to 85 perhaps in focal length in an interview situation, but for me, I'm somewhere usually between 35 and 70, somewhere in focal length. I guess it depends on the setting, but in most interview scenarios, I've not had that happen. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I've talked about the things I like about the camera, but I'm not sure I've really talked about the things that I dislike about it, because there are some things that I wish were different compared to the other Lumix lines that I've used, which has been primarily the GH series, GH5, and I have shot video on the GH5S as well. For me, dislikes, it's heavier, right? I mean, we've all said that, but I expected it to be heavier. It is a full frame camera with pretty heavy glass on it. Overall, yes, it's heavier. It's definitely heavier than an A7 III or any of the others, as we obviously know by looking at the weight. But just in the day-to-day use of carrying it around when you're not shooting, this is a much bigger camera. That's not a shock to most of you. I think that everyone knew this was a heavier camera. But I think until you actually carry it around a little while, you have some appreciation for the portability and the flexibility that Micro Four Thirds gives you. Just carrying the thing around in a bag all day and or pulling it in and out of a bag and so forth, you can see the real benefit and love that I have grown to have for the Micro Four Thirds systems based on that. However, as I've said, certainly the benefits of full frame are there. You've got that better low light capability, and that bigger sensor just is there to gather more light, and you get more natural bokeh and all those things that full frame gives us that 4/3 struggles with, of course, along with the added expense of the glass of full frame versus 4/3 and all of those things. The other thing I've talked about a little bit is the card slot situation. I don't know all of the reasons why XQD and SD were mixed in this scenario, but I would have preferred for the card slots to be the same, whether it be 2 SDs or 2 XQDs. I find the mix of the two different formats really awkward, unusual. I've opted not to buy an XQD currently, kind of waiting to see what happens with CF Express. If you're familiar with that, that's the sort of the coming nature of the XQD world, is the upgrade to CF Express. I think I'm going to hold off on purchasing an XQD until a CF Express comes around a little bit. I might change my mind depending on what that time frame looks like. The other obvious disadvantage with this series of cameras is the L mount. The L mount is a whole new flavor of glass for Lumix, and Obviously, yes, there are some things coming. We've heard about the Sigma Art series, which they are on schedule to release hopefully at the end of July, which we're pretty much there, but pre-orders are being made right now. So I'm making considerations for some prime glass from Sigma, specifically looking at the Sigma Art 35 millimeter 1.2 prime and the 85 millimeter for portrait type stuff, wedding type photography. Videography, honestly, yes, you can use the primes, and obviously the low light capability of the faster glass would be good. But for flexibility purposes, it's hard to beat a 24 to 105 that comes with, as long as light is appropriate. And then certainly on the 4/3 line, I spend a lot of time on a 12 to 35, which is a 24 to 70 equivalent on the GH series. Those are kind of the go-to for the day because of the flexibility and the speed by which you can change your shots and without having to change lenses. And one of the things with weddings for sure with us is that as you know, it's run and gun, things change on the fly. You kind of fly by the seat of your pants when it comes to capturing some of the video for those situations. So that's what we tend to use. The other thing that I noticed about the S1 that never really occurred to me, which perhaps that's silly, is the fact that the GH series has a ton of programmable function buttons, and that is certainly more limited on the S1. I wish there would have been a few more function buttons that you could set up to do varying things. On the GH series, we use them for a variety of things, everything from changing different functions in the camera to different frame rates to different teleconvert type things that we want to do. So I wish there would have been more function buttons on the S1. You've got a couple buttons on the front there, and certainly a few things are customizable, and the 1-2 switch on the side. But overall, I sort of noticed those missing function buttons as time went on. So that's something to keep into consideration. The other thing is, so the rotator dial that goes from manual to C1, C2, C3, on the S1 you are required to push a button on the top to make that change. I still would have liked to have had the option to either lock or unlock that, because by default on all the GH series cameras I leave it unlocked without fail, and we program C1, C2, C3 to do 24, 60, and then 180 slow motion type settings for videography, so that we can easily switch between those and capture whatever we need to in different frame rates. You can still program those function buttons or C1 custom buttons on the S1, obviously, but every time you change, you got to push in that button to make the change. I don't know if other people were somehow accidentally turning that dial, but I never had that problem. I found it to be very usable as it was on the GH series, so I would have preferred that on the S1. The other thing for me is the location of the red record button. So if you dual shoot photography and videography, then you're oftentimes shooting some photos and then capturing a moment on video. So you might be in manual mode and have both things going at the same time, same times, without making a lot of changes to your dial. So what oftentimes we'll be doing is we'll be shooting photos, we stop with the photos, and we hit the record button and capture a moment on video as well. I found that record button to be a long reach for my thumb. It's really kind of on the inside. Maybe that was intentional so that you really have to be going for it to hit it, but I would have liked to maybe have had the placement a little more convenient so that I'm able to just more easily find it, I guess, in the moment. I do find it's a bit of a long reach. Otherwise, you can, in video modes, you can set the regular shutter button to do the record function, so it's not usually an issue in those modes. But when you're trying to hybrid shoot photography and videography, would be nice to have that record button in a little different location. And the other thing is that I found the eye cup that comes with the S1 to not be quite as comfortable as the default eye cup that I found that came with the GH series. I find for one thing, it's round, which is not a huge problem necessarily, but I find that it's just a little too shallow, that it doesn't quite come out far enough to cover, the areas around your eye as well, particularly if people wear glasses. I think it's a little bit more difficult. I did purchase the Panasonic eye cup that kind of has the shape that's made to go around your eye, sort of here, which was okay, but I found it to be a little awkward in use. And also, my wife, who also shoots with the cameras, she's left eye dominant, I'm right eye dominant. And because of that, what I thought was well, perhaps it's been designed such that it could be rotated and used for left eye. But I found that the way in which that cup was manufactured, it could only be put on for right eye dominance. And so you couldn't just turn it upside down and have it available for either eye. The way in which it was manufactured, it would only go on one way. So I'm going to be exploring some aftermarket alternatives for that. Perhaps I would like to have a little bit of a better eye cup to be able to do that stuff as well. So hopefully, maybe today there's been some more movement in the scene to test that autofocus. We're obviously at 4K, so maybe that'll help with those who are considering and thinking about that. I don't know what kind of interviews people do where there's more movement than this, but any more than that would be a bit uncomfortable in an interview situation. So maybe you can see the lights changing, or maybe something's happening. Maybe the fact that we're at f4, maybe it's not enough change in actual focus to be a problem. I don't know. I have no lights on in here today. What you're dealing with now is just simply window light. And so hopefully this has been helpful. Maybe this has answered some questions and talked a little bit about some of the Q&A we had, but also some of my dislikes about the camera that have come up. There is no perfect camera, as we all know. There are lots of different options out there. So, maybe you want to rent one of these and give it a try, or maybe you just want to stick with what you got. I do find its ergonomics are pretty good, and overall I'm happy with the camera. But there's always things that I think could be improved. I hope that Panasonic, who's always been really good at receiving feedback from their users and their ambassadors and all the different people, I hope they take these things into consideration, and I think they do. They seem to listen and build things that are really usable for their user base. So thanks for watching again. Hope this has been helpful. See you later.